In business this week, three things to know. First, Amazon and Jeff Bezos failed to deliver. Earnings are terrible, investors flee, and now there are questions as to exactly what the business model is supposed to be. Then, Ebola in New York, the latest on a doctor who has the virus and the impact it's having. And are lawsuits killing internships? How a time-honored way of learning a business could be doomed. Arise Exchange starts now. Hello, everyone. I'm Andrew Schmertz. Welcome to Arise Exchange Weekend. Shoppers may love Amazon, but the e-retailer and its leader, Jeff Bezos, are creating a lot of naysayers. Investors are fleeing the stock faster than an Amazon package delivered by drone. After Amazon reported dreadful revenues and a larger than expected loss, its share price got smoked for a second day. The stock now hovers near a 52-week low. Some analysts are questioning its entire business model. We'll talk with Britt Beemer in a moment about Amazon and what could be next. But first, Wall Street posted another triple-digit gain among happy earnings news. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up 127.5 points to 16,805 as it's trying to claw its way back to 17,000. The S&P 500 up better than 13, and the NASDAQ up nearly 31 points. The big quarterly earnings reports we're still watching. Bristol Myers reported it topped expectations this quarter. Revenue of $4 billion coming in 3% above consensus estimates. EPS of 43 cents in line with forecasts. Colgate Palmolive says its third quarter profits dipped 17%, hurt by falling foreign exchange rates. Earnings per share coming in at 16 cents below estimates. Ford Motor Company reported strong third quarter earnings. EPS of 24 cents beat estimates by a nickel, boosted this quarter by strong Jeep and SUV sales. And get this, Ford CEO also confirmed that it bought a Tesla, tore it apart, and put it back together, all to figure out how it runs. And Procter & Gamble, quarterly revenue coming in below expectations as well. However, earnings per share of $1.07 were in line with estimates. P&G says it will spin off Duracell into its own company as it seeks to trim its product line. And commodities. Gold up $1.30 and oil pulling back 82 cents. And for the week, here's what the markets did. As you can see, the Dow recovering substantially for the week, up more than 400 points after that huge sell-off last week. The S&P 500 and NASDAQ also posting strong gains for the week ending October 24th. Some economic data out today from the Commerce Department. New home sales were up by 0.2% in September to a seasonally adjusted annual rate of 467,000 units. That's the highest reading since July of 2008. Well, it's back to Amazon now, which delivered a slate of bad news. The company reported a $544 million loss in the third quarter. On the earnings call, one analyst asked Amazon's top executives what exactly is the focus of the company. And so do we. Britt Beemer is America's Research Group President, joins us by phone. Britt, welcome back to Rise Exchange.
Andrew, thank you for having me.
This is an amazing statistic. Amazon, in its entire history, has never turned a profit.
They've never made money, and, you know, it's amazing. I think back when I went to cooking school in France when I was in my 20s, professor one time said it's either the chef or the recipe, or maybe in this case it's both. But I think one of the great dilemmas I've always said about Amazon is that, you know, none of the internet-based companies have been able to make money when they offer free shipping. And, of course, Amazon was known for free shipping all these years, or a very low shipping rate. And because of that, it really destroys what profitability there is. And, of course, they've been selling advertising on their space to other competitors to advertise to generate revenue. But when your basic model doesn't make money, it's a Ponzi scheme long term.
And, you know, you could see when you start a company losing money to build market share. Amazon, though, wants to be basically selling every single product. And that's where the problem comes in, doesn't it? That they just continue to go into new lines and burning more cash.
Well, I would argue something else, Andrew. I won't mention my client, but I have a client that was approached by Amazon. Amazon wanted to sell their product, but they also wanted $1 million to be able to have Amazon sell their product. You know, one of the things that happens to companies, you know, many companies, when they get to be big, will go to other companies and say, look, I'd like to sell your product. If you want to be on here, you know, there's a $500,000 entry fee, or there's $1 million entry fee. You know, I don't doubt the fact that Amazon has done a good job getting money from their suppliers to be on Amazon because they think it's a long-term, buy for them. But the problem is, it gives you an artificial perception of their success.
That's interesting.
When that money is being generated for something other than the core business.
So they basically, I don't want to use the word extorting, but saying if you want in, you have to buy your way in, which, by the way, supermarkets have done for years as far as shelf space goes. So what does Amazon now need to do here? And the second question is, at what point do you think that Jeff Bezos' job may be on the line?
Well, I mean, how long do you have to not make money before they fire you? That's the bigger question, Andrew. I mean, I thought his job was on the line a long time ago, but he's kept expanding more and more categories and getting more revenue for the companies that are trying to sell Amazon. So I'm sure he's generated income that way. But I've thought for some time, and I noticed 2 years ago at Christmas time when I was looking at my data, Amazon did not grow in units. Now, what happened was they had more people who bought from them, buy more from them, but they had no new customers a couple of years ago at Christmas time. So they've really been flat the last 2 years in getting new shoppers to buy from them. And how much more can you get your customer to buy from you before ultimately they say is enough's enough?
Yeah, and you just have to keep pouring money in because they're working off cash flow right now. Britt Beemer, thank you so much. Have a nice weekend. A New York doctor who recently returned from Guinea has tested positive for Ebola here in New York. Dr. Craig Spencer is being treated at Bellevue Hospital Center. Spencer, who works with Doctors Without Borders, became sick after he spent a day riding the subway, eating at a restaurant, and going bowling with friends. In Washington, Congress held hearings on the U.S. response to the disease. Colin Campbell, our senior Washington correspondent, joins us with more. Colin, what are they saying in D.C.?
Well, they're saying that right now Spencer is in stable condition. They're obviously watching his developments as they've been watching others who have been diagnosed with the Ebola virus. For now, it seems like Spencer has received some good news, and this is obviously pleasing lawmakers, but others have also criticized the Obama administration for its response to how it's handled the Ebola virus, especially Darrell Issa has talked about how the Ebola virus really was running ahead of how the Obama administration was handling it. But meanwhile, as he was being criticized by some top lawmakers on the Hill, the president was showing that there is progress being made as far as people being diagnosed with Ebola and pulling through just fine. Nina Pham, the first person to be diagnosed with Ebola in the United States after contracting it from Thomas Eric Duncan, who later died. The 26-year-old nurse has been found to be Ebola-free. She stopped by the White House, gave the president a hug just before she jumped into a car to head back to her home in Texas. She says she's looking forward to being reunited with her family and her dog, Bentley. Meanwhile, disease detectives are tracing Spencer's steps. Of course, Dr. Spencer, who is in New York right now, they're tracing his steps. They're passing out handbills, alerting people to what they could experience if they are experiencing Ebola symptoms. But the mayor there, of course, is saying that that there should not be an alarm, that they have this under control, and that Spencer is showing signs of progress. Also, Amber Vincent, the 29-year-old nurse who contracted Ebola, who also treated Duncan, is also found to be Ebola-free. She's at Emory University Hospital in Atlanta, Georgia.
Yeah, terrific news about the recovery of those two healthcare workers. Colin Campbell in Washington, thank you.
You're welcome.
Coming up, the fine line between unpaid intern and unpaid employee. Are internships a thing of the past? You're watching Arise Exchange.
There is a reason Africa is called the new frontier. What was once potential is now an opportunity ready to be seized. Once revered for our resources, today's wealth lies in our people. People who build the cities that shape the future. People who know an idea in one place means business in another. A generation for whom technology means there are no borders, no boundaries. We are the new lions in a brave new world, kings of the urban jungle. At And there's a bank that puts the world in our pocket and the future in our hands. UBA, Africa's global bank.
Welcome back to Arise Exchange. Some former broadcast interns are about to finally get paid. NBC Universal has reached a $6.4 million settlement in a class action lawsuit filed by several unpaid interns who worked on Saturday Night Live and other NBC shows. But are class action suits against companies threatening the entire concept of internships, especially for college students who need them to get future paying jobs? Fatimah Gilliam is an attorney and founder and CEO of the Azara Group. Welcome to the program. First time on the show. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so first the NBC settlement. Exactly what did they do that was probably wrong here?
I think what they did that was wrong was that they're a big, huge company that's not paying people that come there for the summer. The challenge with big companies is that they want to have a pipeline for talent, but they also might have constraints with their budgets. But the issue is you can't be a big company like an NBC and not pay people to work.
Well, let me ask you that though. I mean, what's the difference between a big company and a small company? And I know internship laws vary state by state, but what is the general rules, and why does a big company have to have a different rule than a small company?
Well, I'm not saying exactly that you have to have a delineating factor between big company versus small company, but I think with NBC, the reason why they really got themselves in trouble is they can't really make the case that they can't afford to pay these people. I mean, the reality is they're a multinational billion-dollar corporation, and they can afford to pay. And if you can afford to pay, you should pay.
All right, so now the worry, though, is that this will have a chilling effect on internships. I was an NBC intern. I interned when CNBC signed on many years ago, and in today's world, I think that probably I should have gotten paid. I mean, I was writing scripts, and I was in charge of getting the gold numbers for the day, and yet, I never considered that. They paid me to get there in the sense that they paid my toll and they bought me lunch every day, and I had a terrific experience. And because the people I met there, I was later able to get jobs in the broadcast industry. What is wrong with that?
I don't think there's anything wrong with having interns come in. I think an internship program is a great tool for a company to bring talent, and it serves as a pipeline for talent into a company, right? So I'm not trying to knock them. I totally support them. I support them for my own company, and I support them for large corporations. I think the issue is you have to ask, what is the intern getting out of it? And are they replacing what would be a full-time paid employee?
That's kind of the key, right?
Yes.
Is there a replacement on a full-time employee? So do you think that these class action suits, and I always question whether they're actually going to get any money out of it, the plaintiffs, as we know how these things go. But there's been suits against NBC, against Microsoft. Do you think now that these companies are going to say, okay, no more interns, or are they going to address the problem and instead of paying them, if they're not going to do that, come up with a viable legal solution?
I don't think internships are going away at all. I think there will be some companies that are a little afraid and maybe they won't offer them. But the reality is there's a lot of value in having an internship program. It's a cheap way to bring in people, if you're going to pay them, right? It's a cheap way to bring in people and to test them out. It's really expensive for companies to hire talent. It's really expensive to deal with turnover rates on an ongoing basis. So the reality is it's a great way to bring in people, to test them out before you fully commit to them as a full-time employee. And it's also a way to train people.
Okay, so if you're running a small business, then what is your advice to a small business owner who wants to have interns and wants to stay on the right side of the law? And by the way, I mention this because there was a California winery now that, that has been fined and shut down because for years they had volunteers. And in California, you're not allowed to have volunteers in a profit company. So what advice do you give companies?
The advice I would give to a company is twofold. First, they should know what the Department of Labor says around internships. There are guidelines out there, so they should go to their website and see what they say. The other thing is they should look at what universities say. Lots of universities at their career centers have policies and guidelines around how they should structure an internship. And it really shouldn't just be that you're treating it as a source of free ongoing labor. It really should be a training program, a mentoring program, a way to give young people opportunities and skills.
Okay. Fatimah, thank you so much. Have a good
Thanks
weekend.
for having me.
Appreciate you coming. Interesting topic. I'm probably going to hear more about this as time goes on. Taking a look at some of our top stories making headlines across the nation and the world right now. The president of the European Central Bank is warning more needs to be done to avoid a recession. At this week's EU summit, ECB Chair Mario Draghi urged Eurozone leaders to make a joint effort on reforms and spur investments to avert a crisis. Meanwhile, the European Union has hit up the UK for an extra $2.6 billion in contributions to its coffers. That's not going over so well in the UK because its economy is doing better relative to the other European economies. British Prime Minister David Cameron insisted he would not pay and comes at a time of increasing pressure for the UK to leave the Eurozone bloc. And if you have ever felt obligated to make up an excuse when calling in sick to work, our advice: don't use any of these from Career Builder's annual list of the most outlandish excuses for calling in sick. They include, these actually happen, accidentally boarding an airplane, plastic surgery that needed some tweaking, having a lucky night out and not know where you were, catching your uniform on fire by putting it in the microwave to dry, and our favorite one here, woke up in a good mood and just did not want to ruin it. Bosses don't like to hear that one. And speaking of work, how many vacation days does your company give you? Most likely there's a set policy and someone keeps track. But more and more companies, such as Netflix, are thinking outside the box. For example, IBM, for years, has used an honor system for many of its workers. And recently, Richard Branson has advocated for unlimited vacation days. Sounds great, but does it work? Here to talk more about these innovative vacation policies is Ann Weisberg, Senior Vice President at the Families and Work Institute. Welcome to Arise Exchange.
Thank you.
This is really kind of an interesting topic, and IBM has been doing this for quite a few years, where you get 3 to 4 weeks vacation, but they don't keep track of it. The company that invented the spreadsheet basically says it was too expensive for them to keep track of it. And we're seeing more companies do this.
Well, it's one thing to track it, and it's another thing to actually say, okay, you get to decide how many vacation days
and that's what Richard Branson has done.
Right, right. And so, you know, it is true that in a world where we can work anywhere, anytime, 24/7, right, we do need new rules. We do need new rules about, you know, when to take time off, how much time off to take, how that looks. But no rule at all, I'm not sure, is the answer.
Okay. And what I think studies have found, though, is when you have no set rules, you end up taking less vacation time, don't you?
Right, exactly. So in our experience, companies that have tried this have found that their people don't take enough vacation. And what I mean by that is that we all know that working 24/7 without a break actually isn't good for long-term performance. Most people burn out. They don't, you know, they just can't keep up at that pace over the long run. So most companies that have vacation policies have those for a reason, to give people a break.
Don't you think we all need to be treated like adults instead of having vacation days and personal days and sick days? Is it a valid move to simply move to what's known as PTO, which is personal time off? Is that a trend that we're seeing, and is that beneficial to workers and the companies?
Yes, and it's paid time off.
Paid time off, sorry. Personal time off.
The P stands for paid, and that's important. And absolutely. So we're moving to a more customized workplace where people take time off for all kinds of reasons, and not tracking the reasons and not caring what the reasons are, I think, is a good thing.
Why do you think someone like Richard Branson is saying unlimited vacation time? Is he, and we've interviewed Sir Richard many times, he doesn't seem like the type of person, well, I'm going to do this because then they won't go on vacation. He seems to genuinely care about the employees.
No, he does. And I think he's trying to say, look, you know, you're in charge of your time. And if you get your work done, I don't really care. And that's a great message in some ways. But what does end up happening, unfortunately, in practice, is that people don't take vacation time.
Let me look at the extreme. I have friends who work at ESPN, for example. You know, in the first month in January, you have to choose all of your vacation for the year. You have to use it, and you have to schedule it then. They have to do that. Well, they claim they have to do that because of a very complicated broadcast schedule. But is that something that companies should consider and therefore compel people to go on vacation?
Well, I was going to say that, you know, I think that we should be thinking about vacation in a really serious way. And that's a signal that has to come from the top. Actually, we're going into performance reviews in a lot of companies. What if part of your performance review was, how much vacation time did you take?
Vacation?
You know, and there are some companies that do track it and actually flag if you haven't taken your vacation time.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if there's other ways you could incentivize people. You know, you get discounts when you go to the gym, for example, because they do better on their health insurance. There's got to be some correlation with being out of the office and taking a breather. And maybe there's some incentives. Are companies looking at that?
We know companies that have tracked performance and vacation and have found a direct positive correlation. In other words, people who take all their vacation actually perform better.
Why are Americans not taking a vacation? What is keeping us tied? Because especially now, you feel less guilty. I remember there was a scene in the movie Network where the lead character says, "I'm going to the Hamptons for the weekend. I'll be completely out of touch." That doesn't exist anymore. So why are people not taking vacations?
I think because they feel like there's just too much work. They feel overwhelmed. Mm-hmm. And so their response is, I'm not going to, I'm just going to keep going.
The stress kind of builds up on each other, right?
In the end, that is that's sort of a self-defeating kind of...
and your performance suffers.
Yes,
and the
because your
suffers.
performance suffers,
And
exactly.
have a nice weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ahead, a pistol-packing anti-gun lawmaker is our favorite person of the day. You're watching the Rise Exchange.
If I was building my own network, it would be for the people, by the people. It would be very diverse. It would be with every culture you can think of.
If I was to start my own news network, it would reflect positive and negative within the continents and the countries around the world.
I think that I would be more looking towards young people.
If I were to build my own news network, it would look like New York City. Old, young, fresh, hip, classic.
If I was to build my own news network, I would just have people from all over who are very connected and diverse.
If I was to build my own news network, my own world network, I would love a correspondent in every country, every location, every city. I mean, it's kind of unrealistic, but how cool would it be to get local stories from the impoverished country, the impoverished city that we don't know about?
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
Time now for our favorite person of the day, when we pick one person who grabbed our attention, and not for the right reasons. Today, it is an anti-gun Missouri lawmaker who was arrested while carrying a loaded 9mm handgun with extra rounds of ammo on her. State Senator Jamila Nasheed was arrested during a protest in Ferguson, Missouri this week. At the time of the arrest, she also refused to take a breathalyzer test after police say they smelled alcohol. But it wasn't the protest, or that she may have been intoxicated, that got everyone's attention. Nasheed is known for sponsoring several gun control bills in her state, including a bill requiring parents of children to notify their schools if they happen to own a firearm. Now, it's important to note, Nasheed isn't charged with breaking any gun laws. She has a carry permit for the 9mm, and we understand is a pretty good shot. And in Missouri, you are actually allowed to consume alcohol while packing heat. But she said the protest was meant to be peaceful, so did she really need to bring a gun to it? And so, Jamila Nasheed is our favorite person of the day. Coming up, how the champagne economy is bubbling over. And speaking of drinks, the weekend is here, so it is 5 o'clock somewhere. You're watching Rise Exchange.
News can definitely be improved when reflecting diversity.
A lot of mainstream news, they don't dive into it.
Who wants to hear about negativity all the time?
They only show what they think people want to know and not what people really should know.
World-based stories, that's what I enjoy the most.
I think diversity of news is important to the world so that everybody will be aware of their surroundings and what is happening today.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
Last week on Arise Exchange, it's back in session for the Supreme Court. And already the court made a historic non-decision.
I really think this is more an example of that judicial modesty.
Criminal masterminds were allegedly going over plans to make crystal meth. One of them butt-dialed 911 for talking about their plans to make illegal drugs without even putting the lock on their phone. Donna and Jason Nope are our favorite people of the day. Watch this week for more Arise Exchange. We now have an official reason to pop the bubbly. Not that we ever really needed any official reason to do that, but it's Global Champagne Day, the 5th year in which champagne enthusiasts around the world pay homage to the libation, and champagne sales around the world are expected to rise. Our next guest, Jennifer Simonetti-Bryan, is a master of wine and a partner at the Wine Ring, here to tell us all about Global Champagne Day. How did we get Global Champagne Day, by the way? How did that happen? The monks in Champagne, France?
I think New Year's Eve was not enough. I think New Year's Eve is generally when everybody has it. And even though Americans have 9 liters per year, so that's our per capita consumption, for sparkling wine, it's only 0.5 liters per year. So that's like half a bottle.
So champagne are outpacing? Oh, no. Americans are drinking a lot less champagne?
No, that's not a trend. It's just in general, we generally drink it once a year. And if you're looking at the sales overall over the whole year, 40% of sales is in October, November, December, or September, October, November, December. And in the last 10 days, it's like 10 to 20%.
Because of New Year's. Okay, so for those who are not entirely sure, champagne actually has to be made in Champagne, France, correct?
Yes, it actually has to be made in the region of Champagne. Otherwise, it's called sparkling wine. Right. So.
All right, so now how does sparkling wine, because I think for many years people thought sparkling wine was an inferior product, but that has changed. I think.
Well, no, I mean, champagne in general is sparkling, all champagne is sparkling wine, but not all sparkling wine is champagne. So we have cava that's made in the style of champagne. It's used different grapes. You have prosecco, which is used a different method. It still has bubbly in it, but they're very, very different.
Now this is a drink that is sort of a celebratory drink. It's not like, you sit at dinner and you have a glass of wine, and you have a second glass of wine, and maybe you have the whole bottle.
In Italy, in France, they actually
is that true?
do. Yeah,
so real, but that's then Americans don't think that way at all.
No, they don't. It's all celebratory. And actually, if the sparkling wine industry, I think it goes back to even when they celebrated at the royal courts. We just love popping the champagne on holidays.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about what we have here.
Okay, so here we have,
it's a little bit of a hint to have a drink.
Yes, exactly. So this is Charles Heidsieck. This is actually the champagne that I served at my wedding. It's $65 a bottle. And actually, interesting note about Charles Heidsieck, he owned a portion of land in the United States, which we now know as Denver.
That would be a big portion.
Yeah, it was. It was. And we also have Piper Heidsieck here. And Piper Heidsieck is, they are related. They have an ancestry, but it was 1785 and is about $40 a bottle. And this is absolutely an incredible champagne.
Is champagne like wine where it's aged?
Yes, a vintage champagne is definitely aged. 95% of wine in general is meant to be consumed within 3 years. But, there's that small portion. Vintage champagne's only made 3 times a year.
How is...
3 times a decade,
How is sort of California, because I think that's where most of the sparkling wine is made here?
Yes, California.
How is California competing against traditional champagne?
Okay, well, in this country, about 9 million cases are produced. And then for champagne, how much do we bring in? It's probably about 1.5 million. And Prosecco has...
Prosecco's Italian.
Italian, yes,
wine.
Yes, and it's
why
made from the
Why don't Americans have a name for our sparkling wine other than sparkling wine? I know we're not as fancy as the Italians.
It's because they have some laws. They get themselves all twisted in a knot. Champagne has to be from Champagne.
Prosecco has to be from Italy.
Italy. So that's where they have that. So we have to.
We have about 30 seconds left. Tell me what a Master of Wine is.
Oh, a Master of Wine is an international title that's given through a 4-day exam, and you have to identify 36 wines blind, has a 10% pass rate, and once you do that, they make you write a dissertation. So.
Okay, there we go. Okay, very good. Well, congratulations and thank you so much. We'll have a little sip.
Cheers.
Thank you for having us. By the way, another thing to toast here on Arise America. is that starting on Monday, we will have distribution on the Soul of the South. So check local listings or go to the Soul of the South website to check out various amounts of Arise programming that you will start seeing on Monday. Next week on Exchange, the Federal Reserve starts a 2-day policy meeting on Tuesday, followed by a news conference by Fed Chair Janet Yellen. And we're going to bring you all those latest developments. Let's take a look at the final numbers for the week. The Dow up better than 400 points. That's a big turnaround from last week, something investors certainly want to see. We will see what happens next week as the earnings season pretty much wraps up. I'm Andrew Schmertz. Thanks for watching Arise Exchange. Have a nice weekend.